Hello everybody. Welcome back if you've slogged through my other crappy videos, and if you're new here, prepare to be underwhelmed. When I did my Savage stock, I hinted around at building another rifle, so here we go again. With the price of ammo, even with reloading and accounting for barrel wear, I wanted something that cost me a lot less money every time I squeeze one off. I won't be covering this one nearly as in depth as my Savage, but I will be hitting the key things I changed and learned along the way and putting it into an easy to digest 20-ish minute video. Last year during Black Friday, I checked to see if anyone was having any decent sales on actions, and Kauger Arms was like 10% off, so I picked up a BR1 action to set aside for a future project, as I only wanted this gun to be a single shot. I talked with my gunsmith after he rebarreled my 6 Creedmoor this winter about building a 223 for plinking and short yardage fun rifle league. He happened to have a 30-inch Brux 7 twist 125 sitting on the rack, so I dropped off the action and he had it done in a few weeks. Now I have the action back and all set up with a 28-inch barrel, so I guess I better get going. First thing I did was sit down and take a bunch of measurements of the action, the bat machine trigger guard, and the front escutcheon my smith made up. This way I can really nail the dimensions needed for an accurate inlet, which is something I wanted to improve upon after doing my Savage. First was the action. I determined the spacing needed between the action screws, then measured and added in the trigger and lug pocket. From there, I took those numbers and made a quick down and dirty model in SketchUp, adding the setbacks for the bushing guides for the router, and sent the job to the 3D printer. I was very particular on this one, how large the action screw holes were, so I could get a nice snug fit and better accuracy. Next was the escutcheon. This one is super easy. It's just a round hole in a template that can be pattern routed, 30 seconds to draw it, and 20 minutes to print it. Last was the trigger guard, also pretty easy. The bat trigger guard is 5/8 of an inch wide, so I knew I could pattern route it with a 1/2 inch flush cut bit, which makes life easy. Draw it and sent it to the printer. Drawing templates for pattern routing with a 3D printer isn't hard. You do have to work in millimeters, as this is what 3D printers work in. I always start with a flat drawing, add in all the features, verify all the measurements, and then extrude the part to 7 millimeters tall. Why 7? Because that way I have enough surface for the bushing guides that are a 1/4 inch tall and the bearing guided bits to run against. If you don't have a 3D printer, not all is lost. I have made plenty of patterns from wood, usually 1/4 or 1/2 inch MDF. It's just more time consuming and overall less accurate. I still use 1/2 inch MDF for my patterns that I use to template route the stocks out, because 3D printing something that large would be annoying at best. Now that the patterns are done, it's time to move on to the wood. I picked up a few nice pieces of lumber for this one. Hard maple once again for the spine, and Peruvian walnut for the outer skins. The wood as purchased was basically skip planed to get the majority of the rough edges off. I did go back and run them all through the jointer, planer, and table saw to get them all consistently wide and 3/4 of an inch thick, so I end up with a 2 1/4 inch blank at glue up. Blank glue up was messy. I used plenty of glue, as this is not the time or place to be stingy. I clamped them up and set them aside overnight to dry. Next day, I pulled the clamps, scraped off any excess glue, and gave it a quick sanding to remove anything extra. Blank turned out really nice, and the color of it is really nice with a little bit of mineral spirits as a test. Next is cutting the pillars to height. I did a quick mock-up to get an idea and used the double nut setup to get them cut and filed straight. I'm going to be honest with you here. I like lamp rod and I will continue to use it, but I'm done trying to get the pillar heights right on at the start. I'm just going to leave them long and trim them to height once bedded in, like how I show later in this video. It's just a time saving and accuracy thing. From here, I went back to paper and drew up a full-size template to route the blank to. For this one, I am incorporating a 4 1/4 inch area 419 ARCA rail section, a bat machine trigger guard, a stock positioning systems butt pad extension for length of pull adjustments, and a 1 inch limb saver butt pad. I'll give a bit more info on each of them as we get further into the video. I did want to add in for comb height adjustment, but there just isn't enough room in the stock with the butt pad extension. Now that the template is done, we need to start laying out the blank for the rear action screw, as all dimensions for the template are based on the rear action screw location. You can see the blank is just a blonde one over 2¼ inches, which is fine. When I mark these up, I don't bother trying to get an exact single line draw for centering something on the stock. I draw 2 lines measured in from opposing sides, and when I drill, I just split the difference. Drill setup involves making sure everything is square, which is simple with a digital angle finder. A square rake's fine for this too and might even be a little faster. It just needs to be dead on. When I drill, I'm using the smallest hole that a 1/4 28 screw will fit in for accuracy's sake. There's a short video of me centering up the drill bit in both directions. I just drop the brad point bit down, tap it where it needs to be with a rubber mallet, and then drill it to depth. Don't mind my big meat hook in the video. This first hole drilled clean and accurately gets us the start of what we need to have for the entire build. Second operation is to get the front action screw in place. For this, I'm using my pattern that I 3D printed. I insert the 1/4 28 screw into the pattern and drop that onto the blank. I center the template from side to side on the blank. A small piece of double-sided tape keeps everything in place while drilling the front action screw hole. Moving on, we need to hog out some material for the trigger pocket and front action lug. I took a few measurements, determined depth, and marked my Forstner bits with tape. I never drill the full depth. I prefer to finish the depth with a router, which is far more accurate. I do leave about an 1/8 inch of material so I can just punch the holes in quickly and move on. After I drill them, I take a chisel and just knock off the high spots, and it's good enough. Now it's time to cut in the inlet. With the previous work done accurately, this becomes a lot easier. The Remington 700 Action is about 50 times easier to inlet over a Savage as well. It only requires one template instead of 4 to cut in all the little pockets and ledges that the Savage has. We just lay up the template with the guide screws, use plenty of double-sided tape, and get to it. Here's a short clip on double speed of me cutting into pockets. Keep in mind I only drop down about 1/8 inch per pass as the stick out on the bit starts to get pretty excessive the deeper you go. Slower and steady is the key here when spinning a 1/4 inch 4-flute end mill at 25,000 RPMs with 3 inches of stick out. The pockets are all cut to depth and they are accurate, and accuracy really is the key here. Barrel channel is next. Same setup as my Savage video. I did go to up to a 1.5 inch router bit to accommodate the 125 straight barrel. Same as before, get set up, get the guide blocks positioned accurately, and clamp securely and go to it. I cut this about 1/8 inch per pass because a 1.5 inch router bit. Cutting on both sides is a fair bit of metal spinning at 20,000 plus RPMs. This next cut is to just increase the depth of the inlet under the action a little bit to give me just a little bit more epoxy in there. Same setup as the previous cut, just 1/8 inch deeper. I'm being careful on setting the router in with it. Spinning to increase depth. Not the safest setup, as a plunge base would be far safer, but doable when only going 1/8 inch more and being careful. Time to move on to cutting the template and the blank to height. First, we run the blank through to get that 5 inch height I'm looking for. I also cut the template to height to get the exact dimension on my pattern. Next cut is for the fore end of the rifle. Table saws make nice straight cuts, and this is far faster and safer than a router. I just turn the blade up as far as it will go and mark the blank for a stop point and put a mark on the saw table to know where to stop. Once I hit the mark, I shut off the saw and it's done. I made this same cut on the template. Onto the bandsaw. First off, I broke my blade guide on my 40-year-old Delta clone saw from Taiwan, so I kept the blade a little high and carefully cut the template down. After it's cut, I clean it up with a file and sandpaper to tune the shape exactly because, funny thing, without proper tuning due to broken parts, the saw really doesn't cut all that great. Here's the template all cleaned up and the blank cut down a bit. I wanted to get closer with the saw on the blank, but with a broken guide, that's not happening. That does come back to bite me in the ass here shortly. Template routing with this big of a bit, with this deep of a cut, is dangerous. Please be careful. I'm an untrained professional, but even I prefer to keep my fingers attached to my hands. You will see this big ass bearing guided router bit catch multiple times because I'm trying to route backwards to get started in a couple spots. In the end, I still have my fingers. One side is down, onto the other side. Well, this side was a shit show. I'll just let the video play at normal speed so you can see what happened in real time. I finished up as much as I could, thankfully without screwing up anything else. The only way I could have avoided the crack from before, to route it backwards, but it tends to want to catch, which is less than optimal and can tear things up too. The other solution is to buy a very expensive in this size, 3-inch spiral up-down cut router bit. The other thing that could have helped, if my stupid bandsaw would have let me cut that section to within like 1/8 of an inch of the cut line. So let's look at the damage. I glued it up, clamped it well, and let it dry, and then went back to the router to carefully finish that cut when dry. Post-op, it looks fine, and when I'm done carving, that little ding will be gone. To shape the butt of the stock, I took a different approach this time. I ended up figuring out what shape I wanted on the butt and drew up another template and 3D printed it out. I attached the template with double-sided tape. From there, I used my small router with a bearing guide bit to give me a butt-end shape that will be much easier to accurately work from than trying to carve it all by hand. This ended up saving me a ton of time. Speaking of time savings, I had a brain cramp and elected to do a little more routing to slim the butt down, removing about 1/4 inch of material from both sides. Chalked that one up to luck or something as I thought of the next steps. From there, I just knocked down all the high spots with the cuts-all disc on the grinder, did a little carving on the grip, and roughed it all in. Came back with the MVP, otherwise known as the Japanese rasp file, and I quickly whipped the rest of it into shape. I'm obviously covering a lot of ground here with a few pics, but all this is in my Savage videos if you want more detail. It was a combination of rasp, files, and 80 grit sandpaper to get me to this point. It's bottom side inlet time for the trigger and escutcheon. Escutcheon is first. Use it to get the pattern lined up correctly and held down with tape. From there, it's a quick job with a router and a test fit. The trigger guard was a bit more tricky as we're getting into the rounded part of the grip. I had drilled the hole from the top side of the stock previously, so I had that to start with as a guide. I used the drill bit to get the stock centered up and clamped in place. From there, I swapped in a 5/8 Forstner bit and cut a hole about 1/8 of an inch deep. I just went nice and slow to avoid any bit deflection or tear out. The template was obviously not going to work, so I had to cut about 1/3 of it off. I aligned it with the hole I just drilled and taped it down. Pretty standard router with bearing guided bit work from there. Then a quick cleanup with a couple of chisels and it's all done. Everything turned out good. I knew I wanted to drop the escutcheon and trigger guard into the stock further, but I wanted to do that later after I verified pillar heights. Speaking of pillars, let's get to that. I used a few different tools to get me centered up right, step bic to center it up, and drill it to a specific size for the brad point to finish the operation. This gave my pillars a nice snug fit and increased accuracy a bunch. I had to remove a little bit of wood in the trigger pocket so the trigger could drop through. Drill a few holes, a little chisel work, and done. Pillars next. Yes, I needed to cut my pockets for the escutcheon and trigger guard just a little deeper. The trigger was easy, a little drilling and clean up with a chisel. The escutcheon, I screwed it up badly. I centered up the template, taped it down, and then proceeded to screw the pooch when I started to make the cut deeper. The 4-letter words I used would make a sailor blush. It's a good thing I was in the Marines because we can handle it. I ended up making 2 new templates, one to fix the spot that was completely chowdered by some goon with a router, and one to drop the escutcheon down a bit to be in the right position, namely flush with the bottom of the stock. A proper fix would have been to inlet a piece of wood into the messed up area and reroute the hole entirely. But this is my gun, and the end result looks good enough. Reality, I've done cuts like this 1,000 times, and this time I was probably rushing a little bit, and I F'd myself. Nice one, genius. I ended up tossing my pillars I thought I had accurately cut earlier, and just cut 2 more about 1/8 of an inch long. I epoxied them in place, and the tape held everything together while it dried. Once the epoxy was dry, I came back, made a bunch of measurements, and used the end mill in my router to cut them perfectly to height. Doing it this way is far more accurate and way faster. With the pillars set and trimmed to height, it's time to start the bedding process. You can see in this picture the action already has the water line, or as I like to call it, the do not bed deeper than this line marked into the action. Doing so is a recipe for disaster because it can trap your action into the stock when it's time to take it apart. Everything was looking pretty good, but the front barrel channel needed to be a little bit deeper, so a quick pass with the router fixed that so I have a solid 1/8 of an inch air gap all the way around the barrel. I added a little black electrical tape to the end of the barrel and the stock to help center and support the barrel during setup and bedding. Let's get on to the bedding. First thing I do is fill the action in the trigger inlet with cardboard. Then we grab the clay and a little water and start making a mess. Make sure you pack all the little nooks and crannies with clay so you don't get epoxy where you don't want it. It's easier to remove clay than DevCon. Trust me, it's messy. Smooth it over with water, trim it down, wipe off the excess clay, and move on to taping off the front lug and guide screws. On the lug, you want a single layer of tape on the front side of the lug so you can get the action in and out of the stock once bedded. Also put 1 layer on the side of the lug if it's a square lug like this one. If the lug is tapered slightly, no need to tape this. Easy way to get that tape cut is to just stick a piece of tape on the muzzle and cut it out very gingerly with a sharp knife. You can also see I taped my guide screws in this time with a single layer of tape. After this, everything gets 2 to 3 coats of clear shoe polish as your release agent. You can see the white haze in the lettering on the action. Don't be stingy. Layer it up. Makes life easier to get it apart. With the action prepped, we move on to the DevCon epoxy. I've already talked about other brands in my last video series. DevCon is proven. It simply works, so I keep using it. I put 1 little rope of clay about 1/4 inch in front of the lug pocket to contain the epoxy from running down the barrel channel. From there, it's the same as my last video. Lay it up, smooth it out, drop in the action, and clamp it up. Clean up the excess with acetone and say a little prayer that it pops out in the morning. After curing for about 16 hours, I took this one apart. It came apart nice and easy. A couple of small taps on the barrel and it popped right out. The bedding job had a couple small voids in it. Not going to worry about it, honestly. The bigger issue is the crack in the grip area, and we'll get back to that in a second. I've had people ask me how I get all the clay out of the action. Easy. Hot soapy water in a bucket and let the action soak for an hour. Scrub it lightly with a soft brush. Rinse it. Dry it with an air compressor. All done. On this gun, being that it's only a 223 and being a single shot, I thought I could get away with no crossbolts. Nice one, genius. I did increase the width and depth of the front lug pocket to account for no front crossbolt. I thought the rear would be fine. Well, I guess not. Out came the quarter 20 all thread and some glue. Cut it to length, peened the top nut in it so it can't spin, drilled in the hole, made some plugs from the offcuts of walnut, and here we go. I set up the stock to very slightly open the crack. I used a cheap medication syringe to inject glue directly into the crack. After that, I clamped it tightly. I mixed up a little epoxy, put in the crossbolt, and I tightened it until I had good glue squeeze out. After epoxying the plugs in, I clamped them in place and left it to dry overnight. After quick sanding, it looks good, and more importantly, it's strong. I set a pad on the bench and gave it a sharp whack or three to see if the glue held. It obviously did, or I wouldn't be making this video. The BR1 action is a dual port left feed right eject action, so that means I need to cut in 2 ports. Pretty easy stuff. Mark them out, file and sand. Done. The bolt handle is pretty simple. Put in the action, mark it out, cut it out, chisel it out, and do a little bit of work with the burr on the Dremel, and it's all finished after sanding. The next one wasn't so simple. In my original idea, the cheek riser would be removable to remove the bolt. However, when I removed the riser from the design, I also removed the ability to remove the bolt. I need a small notch in the stock to allow the bolt enough rearward travel to come out. I guess it's time to do some sketchy shit. I set up my router table using the centering pin and a good mark for center. Here's where the sketchy part comes in. My butt is skinnier than the fore end of the stock. So to make this cut, I had to hold the fore end of the stock against the rail, but let the butt kind of float in space. I would have been better off doing this while the stock was a big chunky rectangle. Prior planning and all that, I guess. In the end, it all came out fine, but had a bit of pucker factor. Here's a quick video of one of the passes to get it done. Some good news for a change. I did fix my bandsaw. The bad news, I spent $240 on a blade guide setup to do it. They made thousands of these saws, both from Delta and all the clones. Mine is a clone. I looked high and low on the internet, and the cheapest upper blade guide I found was $180 on eBay. So I spent the extra cash to fix it forever. I paid $60 for this saw, spent $40 fixing a few things, and then had to fix this. The good news is it cuts really nice now. One thing that I completely missed taking pictures of, other than the before and after, I had to open up the trigger pocket a little bit to get the safety to fit. I used a small carbide burr on my Dremel to remove just enough material to allow the safety to work. We are just about ready for finish now. I spent a copious amount of time fine-tuning and sanding the stock, which is not shown on video for obvious reasons. I gave the stock a quick wipe down with mineral spirits to get all the dust off, and it's ready to go. 10 coats later, this is how it turned out. I'll put a few more beauty shots at the end of the video. Just one thing to go, and it's the thing I hate the most: butt pad fit up. I was going to have my buddy CNC the plates down to size, but time was a factor for both of us. I needed to get this done, and he has no time, so we're doing this the hard way. First thing I did was make up some file guides to help me get it filed straight. Those shiny new guides on the bandsaw helped here. I screwed it all together, and it helped tremendously in this process. First thing was to cut down the extension to rough size. I started with the hacksaw, and that was some bullshit. Next step was to get a little more aggressive, so I put a new blade on my Sawzall and made quick work of cutting it down to about 1/8 of an inch, give or take a little bit, of the file block. Next, and this isn't shown, was me trying to figure out how to get it into a closer shape. I tried a 36 grit flap disc on my grinder, and that was a no-go. Tried an 80 grit belt on my belt sander, and that was a no-go. All they did was clog and get hot. They make flap discs and belts for aluminum. Guess who doesn't have any? So it was break out the files time. I use a rasp to bring it down quick and finish with a double cut to get it to size. Also reminded me why I need to buy some new files. In the end, it turned out good, but after 90 minutes of filing and shaping, I was about done with that. I sanded the edges of the 3 plates that make up the extension to 320 grit for a brush look. All assembled, they look nice and line up correctly so they don't look janky. I did shape the rubber butt pad at this time, no pictures, and it was just as big of a pain in the ass as it was the last time. I really need a belt grinder to make stuff like this easier. It's time to drill the stock. Easy setup, level the end up to make referencing easier. Screw the first piece on and use an appropriately sized drill bit to leave a mark in the end of the stock where it needs to be drilled. Remove the plate. Use a 1/2-inch drill bit to drill the depth. The extension rods drop right in. Done and done. No drama for a change. I added UHMW tape on the keel of this stock to protect the wood and to make it slide nicer in my bags. Process simple. Cut the tape, stick it to the keel, and get it straight because this stuff doesn't come off easily. Work it up and stick it on and trim to length. I left it a bit long and folded it under the butt pad extension. The butt pad goes back in order, and yes, my butt pad looks like crap. It's serviceable, and that's the only thing I can say about it. I added the Area 419 Arca Rail section the same way I did in the last video. From here, it's a quick assembly of the action and stock. Put in the action, tighten it up just shy of tight and back off 1/2 turn. Give the butt of the stock a couple of sharp wraps on the floor and tighten up a little bit at a time front and back until you hit 50 foot-pounds. Morty the shop dog does approve. Time for a wrap up and some beauty shots. Let's talk about the wood. It looks good, but it's prone to splitting as I found out. I would use this stuff again, but more caution needs to be taken. As far as parts, the Kauger BR1 action is nice and smooth. Glad my gunsmith told me about them. Brux barrels needs nobody to vouch for them, and they are 20 minutes from my house. The guys down there do fantastic work. My gunsmith is great to work with. He throated this gun long so I can run 85.5 burgers in it if I so desire, but not so long that I can't shoot 55 grain blaster trash for shits and grins. If you need a smith in South Central Wisconsin, look up Terry's Custom Rifles. He does great work. Bat machine trigger guards and action screws are good to go. Area 419 rail and brake are also good stuff, and I had them sitting around unused. Trigger Tech primer is good enough trigger for this gun, and I happen to have it as a spare, so it went into this build. I might replace it with a Bix and Andy someday, but time will tell. Scope is an older Vortex PST Gen 2 5-25. Nothing real special about it other than it works and it's good enough for 600-yard shooting. The rings are American Rifle Company M-Brace rings. These are by far my favorite rings, and I can't say enough good things about them. Bipod is an old but serviceable Warren unit. Lastly, the adjustable butt stock setup was from Stock Positioning Systems. It is the SPS2 sliding post adjustable length of pull butt pad plate. That's a mouthful. It allows for 2 inches of adjustment, so I can set the length of pull at 13.5 inches for normal people, but run it out there at 15.5 inches for tall people like myself. It's a decent unit, but I don't think I'd use it on anything heavier than a short action 308 or smaller. There are stronger adjustables out there, but they generally only have 1 inch of adjustment. As far as how it turned out, it looks really nice. It does have a few apprentice marks here and there, but I did a good job hiding them, so you may have to look really close to see them. The stock is a lot more accurately built than my Savage. I'm glad I was able to fix a couple of splits I had because starting over would have really sucked. I also think this might be my last stock I build for a while because I really don't need another bolt action. Well, I always do want to do something, so time will tell on that one. If you want to see some load development for this gun, let me know. I could probably hack together a video on what I'm using and some of my methods I use to get it done. Game plan is a 77 grain SMK and 140 loading in Starline brass for starters. Sorry about the length on this one, but I did want to get it done in one video. If you have any questions or comments, please sound off in the comments section. Thanks for hanging out. If you made it to the end, I appreciate it. Until next time.